Okay, well, if I can drag you away from the networking now, I hope that was worthwhile. And I do apologize, we are running a bit late with our program, more than a bit late, but we do have lots of great stuff in store for the second half of our Insight Australia. And welcome back. We've got a really varied program for you in this second half, looking at batteries on the distributed level in homes and businesses, along with key considerations like risk management and insurance, and the crucial issue of battery end of life, second use, and recycling. Bella Peacock is my co-MC today. Welcome back, Bella.
Hello, great to be back. So I'm going to hand over to our first keynote address. Well, first keynote address for our second session. Auke Hoekstra is a Dutch academic and a renewables guru with a beard as long as his list of achievements. Hoekstra's ability to conceive of the clean energy transition as a whole and analyze its components is something we're really looking forward to hearing in the flesh, or the virtual flesh, to be more precise. Hoekstra is the program director of Neon Research at Eindhoven University of Technology and is one of the founders of ZENMO, which stands for Zero Emissions Energy and Mobility Simulations. Auke, welcome.
Hello. Are you seeing me? Are you hearing me?
We are seeing and hearing you loud and clear.
Perfectly, perfectly. I'm going to try an experiment. And the experiment is I'm going to tell a story without death by PowerPoint. So I'm going to tell a little bit about the future of batteries, mobility, and mostly about Australia and how it relates to the Netherlands. And I hope it will be an interesting story that you remember. So when I was a kid, I didn't want to be a superhero or something. I wanted to be a statesman or a bureaucrat. My heroes were Jesus and Gandhi and Mandela. And you can laugh about it, but that's really what drove me. And in the end, I ended up doing something very, very different. I started bringing internet to the world. And about 15 years ago, I realized my heart wasn't in it anymore. And then I got bitten by the renewables bug. If you Google my name, Auke Hoekstra, with solar or PV or whatever, you'll find a graph showing how much photovoltaics are underestimated by the IEA. And when I found that out 15 years ago, it reminded me of the growth of PCs and TCP/IP and the World Wide Web and mobile phones and smartphones. I found that a renewable future is actually possible with solar, wind, batteries, and hydrogen or some other synthetic fuels. And I decided accelerating that transition was how I could try to make the world a better place after all. That's basically why I'm here. Now, 50 years ago, I took a sabbatical and I decided to write a book about electric vehicles, basically because I thought that it was newer and because people would think it's more sexy than photovoltaics and batteries. But to be honest to you guys, and I really am honest now, for me, it was always about solar and batteries, as I explained in my next book, by the way. But by that time, I was an established speaker because I'd written a couple of books, right? So that's a really good way to start a new career. Can say to everybody, try it, and it really works. And by the way, I also try to take it personally seriously on a personal level. So I fly very infrequently. I love that I can do this virtually. I'm almost completely vegan. I drive an electric car, live in an energy positive wooden house. So, and it really feels good. Again, try it. It's not a chore to be bitten by this renewables bug. It's really nice. Now, most people know me from Twitter. I think Jonathan also, because I debunk a lot of scare stories regarding electric vehicles. And for your information, electric vehicles really, really, really do emit much less CO2 than combustion cars, even if you account for battery production, even if you drive on a mix that's not very clean. See my pinned thread on Twitter and you will get loads of good studies about that. But I think we should aim a little higher than just that for this keynote. So, and also wanted to aim a little bit higher myself. So what I really do, what I'm basically, what's my day's work, not my debunking in the evening hours, is leading a large research project. I started 35 PhD students, 20 professors, 20 companies, and they make novel models that try to predict where this renewable future is going. So I'm not just saying this from a gut feeling anymore. I have by now have made a lot of so-called agent-based models that really prove that it's not nonsense. We can really show that wind, solar, batteries, and electrofuels can replace fossil fuels pretty quickly, and they will also be cheaper than fossil fuels soon. And I was also very, very much heartened by the new IPCC work group 3 report that I reviewed. It's not out yet, but it's much more positive about, for example, solar and batteries than the past report, because things are happening really fast. Now, the point is, I'm super enthusiastic about solar, and I live in a country that's super enthusiastic about solar, but actually it's not a good country for solar. There's only 1% of the world that lives further away from the equator than us. And for us, the difference between the seasons is pretty enormous. In the winter, we have about 5 times less sun than in the summer. So seasonal storage is really a bitch for us. And in the winter, we need lots of heat, which is much more difficult to manage with, for example, solar, than driving an airco in this when it's too hot, right? So that brings me to the main message of my presentation. Hey, Australians, you don't know how good you have it. You have 1.5 times our population, but almost 200 times our surface. The amount of space for solar panels you guys have is mind-boggling for this Dutchman. Your solar panels deliver on average twice the amount of energy as ours. And more importantly, in the winter, you still get about half the energy you get in the summer. So Australia is great for solar. And because you are so, well, relatively to us, close to the equator, you basically can make solar a constant resource with just batteries. You need hardly any seasonal storage. So I really envy you guys. You have it so easy. You should do more with that. The developments in batteries are amazing. My rule of thumb would be in the last 10 years, price dropped by a factor of 10. Number of cycles increased by number of 5. And that means if you basically multiply those, you can say that battery performance increased by a factor of 50 in just the last 10 years. How much did, for example, diesel cars or coal-fired power plants improve in the last 10 years? Maybe 3%, 5%. This is a factor of 50. Furthermore, the weight reduced by a factor of 2, more or less. So that means they're more useful in cars and they use less material. And this revolution is set to continue. In 10 years, batteries won't get 10 times cheaper again, but they will get 2 times cheaper. And they will still last 2 times longer, and they will get 2 times lighter. So again, an improvement by a factor of 4, and then lighter batteries, which require less materials and are easier to transport. There's also a lot of new chemistries. I mean, if you are really into this area, the amount of development is mind-boggling. You can take the anode you can make the anode of silicon instead of graphite. Is something that's just around the corner. I visited a company doing that just last week. You can make the electrolyte solid state, much safer batteries, potentially last longer, is really happening fast now. You can make the cathode without cobalt, or even of just lithium and sulfur. Really, all the possible improvements are mind-boggling. So all kinds of revolutions are basically guaranteed. And in Australia, this battery future is especially rosy. Vast amounts of lithium you guys have. And when you drive the mines that mine that lithium with solar, you could become very, very low CO2. That's a problem right now. Lithium from rocks is high CO2 because of all the energy. But if the energy would become solar, super solution. You could also become an exporter of hydrogen with batteries to make sure the electrolyzers run at full capacity year round. So embrace batteries, Australians. Forget about coal. And that's the future. And a few countries are as well positioned to profit from this future as Australia. So that's my short inspirational talk.
Auke Hoekstra, Program Director at Eindhoven University of Technology's NEON Research Centre. Thank you very much for that. Inspiring it was indeed. Now you were saying about the opportunity for Australia in the resource sector, in the mining of these raw materials we're going to need for the energy transition globally. In terms of space and kind of solar applications, we can go gangbusters with solar. But let's focus in on the battery part of the equation. Earlier today, we heard about the market opportunity for batteries in Australia, which is pretty substantial in terms of shifting that demand from or shifting that solar energy, storing that just a few hours into the evening peak. You're doing the kind of modeling of the energy system. How big a job is that to shift that demand? How easily can that be handled by batteries? And kind of what form will the batteries take? Are you talking about large scale,
so,
in the home, or EVs? What's the role?
So I expect at the moment that a lot of those batteries, because they don't need to be light, right? It's mostly stationary batteries, will be lithium-ion batteries that also last a really long time. By now, about 10,000 cycles. That's a lot. And it's actually not that hard. I was on a German PV forum a couple of weeks ago, and there we quickly did the math, and the amount of batteries you need for cars is, well, depends a little bit, but I would say 5 to 10 times bigger than the amount of batteries you need to stabilize the grid. So that will also be my next point, by the way. That's something we're doing pretty well. Well, we're trying to build up to it pretty well. But if you do smart charging, you can basically use the batteries in cars that you've already paid for to do that kind of load shifting. And if you do vehicle to grid, you really make those batteries very powerful. And the battery in your car is much bigger than the battery you need at home to do that sort of stuff, to store a couple of hours of solar energy. Does it answer your question a little bit?
It does indeed. And you think there'll be a mix of also batteries, kind of what type of applications I was asking?
Yeah, to be quite honest, I think nobody knows. But I hope lithium metal batteries and lithium sulfur batteries are going to happen in, let's say, 10, 15 years or something. And these would really be revolutionary batteries. And for the shorter term, I expect a lot more silicon in the anode and basically cobalt-free cathode. So that these are, and maybe in 3 or 4 years, but I'm not qualified to really judge that. A lot of people say to me that's going to happen now. They're getting investments, commercial investments, a solid state. So these 3 things alone is already a humongous revolution on a revolution. But lithium sulfur and lithium metal would be another giant leap, so to speak.
And are you concerned, just as a final question, about the safety concerns? That's very much the focus of our discussion today. Can these kind of safety hurdles be overcome?
I think without a doubt, actually, I'm super positive about it. I mean, first of all, electric cars, for example, burn hotter and longer than regular gasoline cars, but at least don't explode. So I think so far nobody has died actually because such batteries started burning. I might have missed something, but still. And if you see why it's happening, I think it's quite clear that if you have a better production process, and if you have a better battery management system, which is basically just maturing the industry, then even with the current batteries, you would have very little problems. And you can also, we are constantly improving the chemistries. And on top of that, you have things as solid state batteries. So there's about, I would say, 5 different pathways in which to make batteries safer. Many of them just maturing the industry. So basically a given that will happen in the end. So yeah, I mean, we have to take them seriously, those safety concerns, but they will go away. And gasoline, on the other hand, it will always be very flammable. That's something you can lock it up better. But if your tank starts leaking, you have a problem. And that's not what batteries offer. Batteries offer in the long term, already they are much safer, of course, but in the long term, they are really much safer.
Okay, that's a good message to leave on, and we'll dig into some of those 5 pathways that you explored in terms of achieving battery safety just a little bit later this evening. One comment, impressive talk. Thank you, Auke. And from me also, thanks very much.
Glad to be of help.
Okay, Bella, what do we have coming up?
We have soon our second panel discussion, looking a little bit more closely at residential batteries. But before we turn to that, we're going to look for the potential of batteries to the actual question of performance. We have Susan Dedman. She is a project engineer at ITP Renewables. She joined the Renewable Energy Consultancy in 2016. The same year, it began its ITP battery trials at the Canberra Institute of Technology. It's one of the world's first government-funded battery testing programs to publicly report its findings. The trials independently assess the reliability and performance of a range of battery technologies on the Australian market. And Susan's here today to present a case study on the latest findings. Susan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Bella. Happy to join. I'm going to share my screen. So if it's working, that would be great.
As of yet? Oh, we've got movement. It is indeed. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, yeah. Great. All right, 1 second. I've just got to juggle my other screens. All right, I'll kick off. Thanks very much, Bella. Today I'll be talking about ITP's Battery Test Centre and providing a bit of an update on the latest results. I forgot how to change shares. Oh, there we go. Just a bit about ITP before I jump in. We're specialists in renewable energy consulting, and we've been around for over 40 years, starting in the UK and in Australia for 18 years now. The majority of our work is in engineering consulting, specialising in solar PV and energy storage, but we do also do work in strategy, compliance and analytics. Our expertise in battery storage is historically based in specifying and designing mini-grids in the Asia-Pacific and remote Australia. Over time, and more recently, as lithium-ion prices have fallen, these chemistries have emerged as a major player in the energy storage market, in which lead acid was traditionally the incumbent technology. This has allowed us to expand into designing and specifying on-grid applications a lot more, and also into battery performance testing and analysis. At the time of the inception of the Battery Test Centre project, which was around 2014 to 2015, there was a lot of excitement about the potential of these technologies and their advantages, but there was no or very little data from field installations showing the performance of the batteries over a reasonable period of time. The aim of our testing is to look at performance such as capacity retention and round-trip efficiency of the batteries over time, but also our experiences during procurement, installation and commissioning, and the sales and technical support from the manufacturers through these stages and continuing through into operation. As an ARENA-funded project, knowledge sharing is a really important part of this, which we mainly do via our website, where the battery cycling is shown live. That's a screenshot there. And we also do public 6-monthly reports, which include analysis of the results. In order to try to see effective throughput on the batteries in a reasonable amount of time, we use accelerated cycling in the lab. The batteries are cycled 3 times through their full usable capacity per day. The nominal trial period for the batteries is 3 years. So at the end of that, we'll have almost 10 years of equivalent cycling. The aim is also to test the batteries in real world conditions as much as possible, so the temperature in the lab, depending on the time of the day and year. Over the lifetime of the test centre, since starting in 2016, we've installed a total of 28 batteries. 17 of those are still cycling, and they're the ones shown in white there. In phase 1, we originally started with 8 batteries, That included a lead acid, an advanced lead acid developed by Siren, and 6 lithium-ion batteries. At that time, it was actually really difficult to find 6 different commercially available lithium-ion products. Obviously, that's changed a lot, and we've been lucky enough to be able to extend our testing twice, adding 10 more batteries each time. The vast majority of those are lithium-ion, but we've also been able to add a few technologies which have become commercially available, including a saltwater battery, a zinc bromide flow battery, and a sodium nickel chloride battery. So how do we measure the performance? One of the things we look at is capacity retention. And one of the ways we do that is by running what we call a capacity test on all the batteries each month and measuring how much energy is discharged. We'll discharge at a lower 4-hour rate and a temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. You can see here the latest capacity test up to this month for the remaining phase 2 and phase 3 batteries. Just be aware, of those different scales on the y-axis there. You'll see that there is a fair amount of variation in the capacity, not only between batteries, but also between tests for the same battery. We've attempted to fit linear trends on some of these results, but it's not always an accurate indication of how it will continue. Basically, this has shown us that there's really a lot of variables that performance and a single discharge. And while you can draw something from these graphs, it's not really the entire picture to just look at a number of specific discharges. What we also show in our reports is discharge data for every cycle of the batteries. And this is where we do get to see some interesting things. So I've got a few examples here. On the top, I hope you can see my mouse. This is the Sony battery, which is the only battery still cycling from phase 1. Haven't had any operational issues with this battery, and it's sitting at 81% state of health after over 3,000 cycles. This one on the top right here, this is one of our phase 3 batteries, and we can see something happened here which started in the energy discharged. The manufacturer came to the lab and ended up replacing one of the battery modules, which was faulty, and we can see that after that, there was an increase in the amount of energy it was able to discharge, but they've kept an eye on it and aren't happy with its performance still after that, and they'll be visiting the lab again once lockdown ends to take another look. On the bottom left here, we have our zinc bromine flow battery, which, although it's a phase 2 battery, has a relatively low number of cycles. It was replaced a couple of times early on. And this battery also only does 2 cycles per day as opposed to 3. It requires a regular maintenance cycle, which we run every day. You can see that, jumped ahead. You can see that early on, there was actually a slight difference in the energy discharge between those 2 cycles every day, but that's now evened out, and we're also seeing very little or no capacity fade, which is to be expected for this technology. The last graph here is one of our phase 3 batteries, which doesn't have communications from the battery BMS to the inverter, meaning that the inverter is required to estimate the battery state of charge. We found it really difficult to get this particular battery and inverter working optimally together, which is kind of indicated by the large spread of energy discharged per cycle, as well as the low amount of energy discharged per cycle compared to its nominal capacity. Since installing this battery, the manufacturer has confirmed that it actually doesn't support this inverter as compatible. So I guess just using those as an example, it really goes to show that aside from looking at the data on capacity retention and performance, there's a lot to be learned just by looking at the reliable operation of the batteries and how well they continue to cycle. So this chart gives an operational summary of all of the batteries from the time of installation, 1 per row, across time. And the red sections highlight periods where the battery either had to be replaced or had a fault inhibiting cycling. So I won't go into the detail of the individual batteries, but the point here was to show that there's really quite a lot of red on this graph. And I think going into the trial, we hadn't expected the operational data to be so valuable, but it's really highlighted how important technical support is after the sales process. So what can we take from all of this? The question we often get asked is, which is the best battery? But the reality is that we only have a sample size of one of each battery installed. In the lab, there's also some differences in battery cycle rates and inverters. And this makes it quite difficult for us to draw product-specific conclusions. But we can draw some general conclusions, while some of the batteries are retaining their capacities well. The industry as a whole still has improvements to make in operational reliability, with issues often coming out of battery management, integration and control, and then requiring support both in the sales process and the knowledge of those, technical knowledge of those staff, but continuing into operation. We're seeing a number of manufacturers place stronger requirements on remote monitoring, which is helpful for remote diagnosis and evaluating warranty claims, but hopefully can also start to move installations to more proactive monitoring for faults. Looking forward, our next 6-monthly report, which the graphs I've shown are actually taken from, will be released this month, probably next week. So keep an eye out for that, and that'll be available on our website. And on a bit of a tangent, but in line with our belief that testing facilitates quality improvements and technology confidence, we've recently finished building another test lab, the Distributed Energy Resources Lab, with our partners ANU, UNSW Canberra and Evo Energy. And the purpose of this lab is to enable testing of grid-connected DER devices in a sandbox kind of environment, simulating a grid before, allowing installation onto the live grid. But we continue to see strong interest from both the public and battery manufacturers in our battery test centre. And we look forward to the continued development and improved performance of these products. Thanks very much, Bella.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan. It's such a valuable program. I love the website. I think it's got so much really good information, especially for someone like me who's actually trying to buy a battery and figure out what is out there and what's best. I had a quick question. Will this program be going on indefinitely, and will it add more batteries as they come onto the market, which kind of, it seems like when you started 5 years ago, there wasn't much, but it does seem like there should be a lot more coming in.
Yeah, definitely. It's already been extended twice. So the original test period was 3 years, and we've been able to add 20 more batteries since then. The number of replacements has actually been more than that, because some batteries have been replaced with newer models, but continued, kind of under the previous testing slot. So there's no doubt that there's continually new products coming to the market, and we'd love to be able to test them all. We're just not able to do that. Currently, the project is continuing until I think it's the end of March next year. And that'll mark 3 years from the start of phase 3. So we'd love to be able to continue testing, but I think also, we're now starting to see really valuable data coming in from live installations in the field, both in homes and obviously larger scale installations as well. So I think that gap is being filled to some extent as well from, field installations.
Oh, right. That's really fascinating. And just one last question. Why did the bromide battery require so much maintenance?
Early on, it had a few issues with some electrolyte leaks. There were some issues with the tank manufacture and just kind of micro cracks. And it was a bit unlucky, I think, that they had a few issues in a row, and it resulted in multiple replacements. So we're actually on, I think, number 5. But this last battery has been, performing without issue for quite a while now. And to the manufacturer's credit, they were really proactive in letting us know about a lot of these issues, in that they had been, remotely monitoring batteries and getting in touch with installations to proactively roll out these replacements. So I think that is really valuable. And part of what I was saying about remote monitoring, allowing this kind of thing, I think as the battery test centre, we are aware that probably manufacturers are keeping a bit of a closer eye maybe on our installations than some others. But I'd really like to see that remote monitoring allowing, almost automated fault flagging and more proactive management of something that a homeowner might not pick up as a potential fault.
All right. That's super fascinating. Thank you so much, Susan Dedman, a project engineer at ITP Renewables. In half an hour's time, we'll be closing today's event fittingly with a senior research fellow from the Deakin University, Christina Pozo-Gonzalo, and she'll be speaking about circular economies in energy storage. But for now, over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Bella. Well, we've come to our next panel discussion, and it's pretty clear that different battery technologies, distributed battery products perform pretty differently under test conditions. And we're going to look into some of the contributing factors behind degradation, failures, and of course, safety concerns like fires. And we have three very knowledgeable panelists to take part in this discussion. And of course, I'd like you to take part in the discussion also. So please keep sending through your questions via the chat app, and we'll be getting to as many of those as we can. Our panelists today, I can see appearing one by one up on our screen. We have Wilf Johnston, the General Manager, APAC region for Enphase Energy. We have Sebastien, National Sales Manager with Fronius. And while she's not on the back end at the moment of the event app, I hope she joins very shortly. Oh no, I'm getting the thumbs up. Alison, Lennon, Research and Teaching Academic at the UNSW School of Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering. Thank you very much for your patience, the three of you. I know we are running a little bit late today, but great to have you as a part of the event. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure, Jonathan. It's been on our side, but it's a pleasure to be with you guys, and thanks again for organizing this wonderful session.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for taking part. Alison from UNSW, I'll come to you first. We kind of heard about the importance of battery management systems, the BMS, in terms of ensuring safety, but also, reliability of battery performance. Does that surprise you at all? What do you think of the importance for BMS, particularly for customers, for homeowners and for business owners?
So I think the for homeowners, distributed storage, the battery management system becomes very important. For a homeowner, you have your battery in the garage and you have your solar panels up on the roof. And it's very easy to forget that your battery is actually a system and that has flammable materials in it. Your solar system and your battery keep working. You can use your power in your house. And it's very easy to forget. But being a battery system, a chemical system, its safety really depends on how fast reactions occur. So how fast you charge it, how fast you discharge it, the temperature of the battery. And most homeowners are not experts in batteries. I mean, they're not chemical experts. And so they don't think about it, and they don't actually understand sometimes if there's diagnostics on the battery that they might not understand. That can be quite confusing. So it's a little bit different to maybe utility scale, where you've got a very large investment and there's an experienced engineer that's there monitoring the battery and seeing all the signs and being able to interpret what's actually happening. So I would argue that actually for a homeowner, the battery management system is super important, in fact, just as important as utility scale or more so. And to be able to have a battery management system that can monitor, can regulate the way the battery is being used to make sure that if the battery is degrading slightly, that you're not charging and discharging it too fast, to be able to monitor how fast it's degrading and regulate the operation. But also to use that monitoring to provide the warning if there are any safety concerns. So if you are getting unmatched or mismatched cells in a string, then maybe the battery management system can patch out those cells and you don't have over voltage or overcharging occurring. You can make these battery management systems a lot safer, I think.
Well, I see both Wilf and Sebastien nodding as you were explaining the importance of battery management systems. So Wilf, I'll bring you into the conversation now, the Managing Director of APAC for Enphase. Enphase supplies its AC batteries for a number of years now, and I understand a new unit is coming into the market at the moment, or a new model. Tell me about how Enphase, it's the power electronics and the battery management system, the battery conversion, the power conversion rather, try to achieve kind of some of these goals, these needs that Alison set up.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I'll resist the temptation to do an infomercial here. I think I'll focus on what we've decided to do to address, I guess, the integration of all those components. So we decided at an architectural level to reduce choice. So you know what? You can't use any cell pack. You can just use our cell pack. You can't use any BMS. You can just use our BMS. You can't use any solar inverter or battery inverter. You can just use ours. And the idea there is that with everything in the same, I guess, the same package, it enables us to do a lot of testing to make sure that all those components work nicely together. We don't have to take into account, different combinations of different, BMSs and actual batteries and inverters and what have you. We can test all of them. We can lock it in and just make sure that everything kind of plays nicely together. That's been our approach, which is, as I said, it does reduce choice, but we think from a safety point of view, it does lead to something that perhaps has less moving parts or less variables, I guess. That's how we go about it.
Okay, Sebastien, Eng from Fronius. Fronius, in the early days of battery installations, I remember that Fronius had a kind of partnership with Tesla with the Powerwall. Now I think it's mainly BYD, if I understand correctly. It's a kind of different approach. It's the power electronics being supplied separately to the battery cells. How does that integration work, particularly with this kind of safety and operation play in mind?
Yes, so it's a bit of a different ways of approaching, let's say, the whole solution. So with, let's say, the Fronius solution, what we want to have is basically on the DC side, having the battery and being directly connected to the BMS, where we can basically control the flow of energy, which also helps in terms of increasing the lifetime of the cell, of the battery also itself. So for us, it's really making sure that we are within the limit of, let's say, the battery itself, and making sure that we discharge and charge, as Alison mentioned, that it needs to be done in a nice and smooth way. Our approach is a bit, I think, different from let's say, the market. Fronius being expert in power conversion, we stay in our area of expertise, right? And that's where we bring an expert in battery production. So pretty sure a lot of people have heard about BYD providing battery cells to a lot of different EVs around the world, right? So they really know about the behaviors of the cells and how it reacts. So we work very closely with them to make sure that the quality standard in terms of testing, in terms of longevity of the product, both sides of BYD and Fronius is met. So there's a lot of testing that we go through on our side for sure.
And BYD kind of promote their batteries as being particularly safe, variant on lithium ion. How important is that for Fronius in terms of that partnership?
Well, in terms of, let's say, lithium ion, we heard it a bit earlier from Professor Paul, right? He was mentioning different pictures, and I think he had a lot of testing. In general, we think that the battery chemicals, I think from our side, that the lithium iron phosphate is one of the safest, I would say, out there. On our side, that's where we gravitated more. Even the previous battery that we had before, which was manufactured by Sony, was also a lithium iron phosphate. So definitely on this topic, we're quite keen. As he said, he had some data to show, right? To show different battery chemicals and how it reacts. We are more than happy to learn. But in general, from our perspective, from our experience, is really this lithium iron phosphate. I would say one interesting thing from all those videos and people watching those things even online, right? I think it's very the extreme in a way, because if you think about it, your phone has a battery, your laptop has a battery, as we also heard before, your car also has a battery, right? It's pretty safe in a way if it is manufactured the right way, and how you mentioned it before, with the quality of BYD having many EVs around the world, even buses, I think, if I'm not wrong there. So we really want to leave the expertise to the expert, right? That's their area, and we focus on our area, which is power conversion. And I would say one important thing then will be the communication, right? That's one of the crucial parts, and that's where we spend a lot of time with them. I always remember that they come to Australia. They also went to our international headquarters. So there's a lot of close communication between parties.
Okay, Wilf, on the battery chemistry side, do you accept that some lithium ions are safer than others?
I'm I'm hurting my tongue right now, biting it so hard. Look, I think what Sebastien said is absolutely right. There are different battery chemistries. If we go back to all of the debates that were happening in Australia a few years back around battery standards, that was a classic example of there not being a clear enough distinction being made between lithium iron phosphate and other forms of batteries, where you had less safe forms of lithium ion batteries that were prone to catching fire and so forth. And I've seen the nail tests that you can do safely. The less safe batteries will literally explode, as we saw in those very alarming videos. But the others kind of don't. They sort of fizzle out or might let out some fumes and so forth. But that's kind of it. I take issue with some of that, especially when it comes to saying that there's no. I think someone mentioned in the chat, this idea that there's no electric vehicles in German parking garages anymore because they're all so dangerous. Well, that's actually not true. Quick bit of Googling and a Google Translate show that was a temporary ban in place for a few weeks while they sorted out the policy for a petrol car that blew up. But hey, facts get in the way of a good story. I think really it's about looking at getting the right safe chemistry, but then on top of that, of course, putting in place safety measures around installation processes to really kind of really double check and be super safe that it'll be good for people's homes.
Okay, well, Alison, I think I might come to you on this one. It seems like the conversation's moving a little bit in the direction towards regulation and the regulatory landscape. I don't know how closely engaged with that you are, Alison, at UNSW. Can you comment on kind of the ways in which distributed batteries are being regulated in Australia? We had the CEC very involved in the early days of solar in terms of certifying products or allowing certain products under the STC or the SRES program. Are you encouraged by what you are seeing in terms of these kind of measures in Australia?
I think so. We heard earlier, in Australia that we have taken care about where the batteries can be to make sure that they're not in the house. I think that was very important. I must admit, I'm a firm believer that I think a lot of safety issues will gradually be resolved with time and learning. There's still a lot of understanding. Lithium ion is very powerful. It's like the rocket fuel of batteries, really. We talk about having the high voltage and the high energy. People spent a lot of time and effort and money in making rockets safe so you could have rockets going up to the space station because the benefit was significant. And I think the same will be true for the higher energy lithium-ion batteries. There's a lot more understanding happening at universities about how they can be made safe in terms of the materials you use, the separators, electrolytes. We've heard a little bit about that today. In terms of the regulations, I think in terms of safety in where you put them in the home, but also the quality of the interface that the batteries have to provide. I think there's a lot of extra work that probably needs to be done in terms of standardizing those interfaces, and I think that will play out, especially when we start talking about virtual power plants in more detail. We've had more trials in Australia so far, but that whole concept of where you have a battery remotely controlled and you have batteries from different manufacturers, different inverters, then I think there will need to be a lot more standardization at that point in terms of how the battery or the battery management system responds to operations, not just within its local system, but remotely.
Yeah, well, and actually we heard right at the top from South Australia, Scott Oster saying that 26,500 batteries or homes, households.
Yeah, a lot.
So we are getting to a pretty significant volume of the participants. Wilf and Sebastien, in terms of these kind of VPP compatibility and protocols, and what progress do you see being made there? Who would like to jump in?
I will let.
You're too polite. You're too polite. Sebastien, I'm going to point to you first. Sebastien, jump in.
So I would say definitely this is a big topic, right? Having a lot of batteries around the country. So this plays a big role. So one of the important part, I would say, looking at the whole picture, and also before we were mentioning, maybe we also have vehicle to grid also, right? Having like an electric vehicle to discharge. Having standard protocol plays a big part of the picture, right? For example, the SunSpec Alliance, where you have the same protocol in terms of sending those commands, right? And also doing it in a safe way, right? Because you need to think about it down the track. If the customer wants to expand their PV or they want to use different technology, you want to make sure with the solution that you're looking at right now is future-proof, right? So that's, I would say, one important part. In terms of the regulatory side of things, which I think we touched base a bit before, that's something that I think Australia is quite advanced in, right? So there's a lot of regulation in terms of courses that installers needs to follow. There's like actually a course that is like a mandatory part of it. The standard community has a battery standard also, which they were pretty quick in setting up also. It doesn't stop there. They also talk to installers about those regulations of, okay, give us feedback. What do you think about different rules around batteries being installed? So you can see that there's quite a lot of traction in terms of rules and regulation. Of course, you can have, let's say, the best product out there. If it is installed incorrectly, you will have some challenges down the track. So in terms of training installers, giving those information out there, in terms of controlling what the battery can do, what the battery can't do with the inverter, giving the right information not only to the installer, but to the homeowner. That's also an important part, right? Because they need to understand what they're getting. And as Alison mentioned, is when you have, for example, all those batteries around the country being charged and discharged, you want to make sure that you don't, let's say, kind of really push the product to the limit, right? So that's where there should be protocols in place so that you don't basically drain the whole battery too fast. And that's something that we've been looking pretty hard on. We have like a whole solution team who looks after those VPPs and discuss with integrators, okay, what they can actually do in a safe way, right? What they can discharge and charge the battery in a safe way. That's, I would say, the big picture. So just to summarize, there's like a few key points. I would say, of course, protocol, and then safety, and then training will be the three main pillars that we should really pay attention, I would say.
Okay, over to you, Wilf, in terms of this VPP, because you can imagine, right, a battery is required, a fleet of batteries is being called on to provide some kind of very rapid response to some kind of grid disturbance, that they could essentially have the life sucked out of them, I suppose.
Yeah, it's quite interesting as a manufacturer looking at the combination of a painstakingly designed and manufactured and tested product being then kind of placed out there at the mercy of a whole bunch of adventurous new energy retail models, because don't quite know what's going to happen, really. I think probably what is going to happen, is that the BMS, if well designed, will protect the battery, right? So the BMS will do its job. It'll stop the battery going into some kind of thermal runaway or stop it being sort of, cycled in an unhealthy way. and I expect the risk will then go back to the operators of the VPPs, who will go, oh, hang on, we've factored in an Excel model or something more advanced in terms of how we're going to make money out of this VPP, and that assumes reactivity times of X and durations of Y. Doesn't look like the hardware is going to do that. How are we going to handle it? So I think there is definitely going to be an experiment going on that front, and I think clearly for large-scale batteries, there's presumably a lot of people looking at the data coming out of the Hornsdale Power Reserve and others, and going, all right, so how much were they able to make out of that transaction? How did that stress the battery, etc. So I think it's easy to do when it's one big central battery. Probably a little more complicated to do when you've got a couple of thousand of them sort of dotted around the country. So yeah, should be interesting.
Indeed, and some of the revenue figures from Hornsdale, that you point to, some of that arbitrage can be, millions of dollars in a very short space of time, or at least $8 million. So,
they paid the battery off already, right? So
yeah, exactly.
They can go buy a new one when that one breaks.
Yeah, indeed, but much more difficult when you have a whole heap of different battery technologies. Yeah, okay, we did touch on vehicle to grid. Sebastien, I know Fronius is kind of involved in kind of the EV charging space. How kind of important do you think that is in terms of, supplying the end customer, the business or the homeowner with a safe and reliable product that can also be, optimized as part of a home energy solution?
Well, for us, it's, I think, one of our vision, which we call, maybe it will sound a bit salesy, but it's this 24 hours of sun being 100% renewable. And also it was mentioned before that Australia can become one of the biggest exporter of hydrogen, right? That's like green hydrogen, which was also a big topic. So that's a bit, I would say, the vision that we have. And of course, electrical vehicle plays a big part. Hydrogen plays a big part. To be able to do all of this in a safe way is definitely important. For us, it's basically looking at the future proofing of all those different components of your system. So of course, we mentioned the panels, we mentioned the battery. One part which for us, the design that we have, the inverter, is basically the heart of the system. It's the part which does the control, right? And it's also the part which will, in the future, talk to, let's say, your electric vehicle or your charger, as an example, right? So we are definitely also investing in terms of like car chargers. That's something that we're looking into that. And also the whole infrastructure in terms of EVs. So from Fronius international point of view, I'm not too much across it, but there was like a big project also on our side where we had so many electric vehicles back at our international headquarters, where we had to design the whole thing, the whole, let's say, structure behind it. How do you charge your car? If someone comes early, like all the procedures. So on our side, I would say it's kind of the major project that we really want to push. It's been our goal since the beginning to be able to provide this 100% renewable. And with that, of course, you need to make sure that you have the product which has the feature which meets the requirement of the customer. And one of those requirements that we are all here to discuss is safety, right? How do you make it safer? One of the major part we think is the manufacturing side of things. I think we were talking, funny enough, about that, Wilf, a few months ago when COVID was not in Australia, right? How quality products are important. And that's something that we spend a lot of time and we take a lot of pride. And also from previous part, right? They did mention that you don't want to, you want to have, let's say, cheap product, but you don't want to sacrifice, for example, the safety of the product, right? So you need to have the right balance with all the safety, the requirement of the customer, the future proofing of the product, and the overall solution to the customer. So I know it's a bit of a long answer to this question, but that's where we are kind of going on the front side of things.
Okay, Wilf, did you want to add anything to that or come back to that? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
So look, I think when we look at the benefits of storage, you've obviously got your backup piece. That's one reason people buy it. the next reason that people would buy it is some form of financial benefit, whether it's an energy arbitrage or something. And I think it comes back to that point where the way that value is going to be realised is through an electricity retailer or a VPP operator or something. They're going to want to, I think there'll be a point relatively soon when those programs get up and running, where they'll have to look at the different types of battery storage that they're signing up to that fleet of VPPs and go, all right, how is that product going to behave? Is that going to be well managed, and therefore I can arbitrage quickly and simply and with some form of reliability, or is it a little less reliable and therefore maybe I won't provide the same VPP fees or rebates or something? In the same way that when you're developing a PV power plant, a financier looks at the stats on the PV modules and goes, all right, well, this is the rate of return I'm going to expect from this plant because it's using X module or Y module. I expect the same thing will start to happen with VPPs and storage. At the moment, they're all being treated equal. They're all being paid out some, $200 to join up. It's all very arbitrary. But I imagine it won't be long before, there's serious money at play, and that'll need to be thought through.
Okay, so there'll be some nuance introduced there. Alison, I want to ask the last question as we round out this panel to you. I don't know if you were able to join earlier and saw Tristan Edis from Green Energy Markets. He kind of made the case that we really need to accelerate the deployment of distributed batteries amongst the distribution network, and he proposes that kind of reforming the SRES, the STC program, or rather tweaking it to really incentivize batteries in a significant way. What do you make of that proposal?
Look, I totally agree that we need to increase the ownership or the extent of distributed batteries. I do think we need to have some ways of regulating to make sure that we ensure they're safe. And I'm actually quite heartened by, I know there's a lot of challenges with the VPP, but I'm actually quite heartened by some of the developments with these virtual power plants. And I think they do provide actually a very good option going forward. So, although there's challenges in interfacing with all the batteries that, and they might be different OEM batteries too, because I think when the AGL did their virtual power plant, they had 3 different battery chemistries, or at least 3 different battery manufacturers. That becomes challenging. But if you do have a reasonable BMS on those batteries, it is, I think, technically achievable. But the other big benefit I see by using VPPs or something similar to that as a way of incentivizing home ownership is that you can actually do a lot more remote monitoring. And we have actually talked about this in an earlier talk today too. And the remote monitoring in partnership with a sophisticated battery management system can provide a high level of safety in a distributed environment, because then you can actually use cloud data. You can look over the populations of a particular battery type and see how one particular battery is performing compared to a whole population of those batteries on the virtual power plant. And then that there's something wrong with that battery. And maybe you can provide the service to the homeowner to ensure that that battery is serviced appropriately. So I think with the scale up of programs like virtual power plants, there is a bigger incentive. It might become financially more attractive for homeowners. Like at the moment, you have to look at when the economic end of life is for these distributed or residential batteries. I mean, they are getting cheaper, but they are still expensive. And programs like the virtual power plant can actually make them more attractive financially to the homeowner as well as other incentives that states or federal government can provide.
Okay, so actually additional value then in that kind of remote monitoring service. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, big data and cloud computing and all of those catchphrases that we hear, but can be of great value to the homeowner who doesn't really know what's going on in that box that's out.
And they don't have to if you do this.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, I've got one last question from an attendee. I'll just 1 or 2 word answers or 1 sentence answers from each of you. VPPs versus community batteries. We heard from WA that they're doing a lot of community batteries. How about this to round out our discussion? VPPs or community batteries? What do you think has the most value? Alison, to you first.
Look, they're both very similar. I mean, I think I would go with VPPs because I think they can provide the maybe clearer financial incentive for the homeowner. I can see the merit of community batteries, maybe have more control over your own asset. But if I had to make a choice, I'd probably go with VPP.
Okay, Wilf?
As well. So again, love the idea of the homeowner being engaged and understanding, a little bit more about how they use energy and how to, I guess, manage their own consumption and be efficient.
Yeah, okay. And Sebastien?
Well, it doesn't allow me with too many different points. So yeah, definitely VPPs as both of them mentioned. So there's a lot of benefits out of the VPP, and we found from our perspective, I think it's an easier step forward, like doing it like a baby step in a way, moving forward.
Yeah, and also leveraging the engagement of all those households. And we know they love rooftop solar in Australia. What is it? 1 out of every 4 roofs now. So really encouraging. Thank you very much to all 3 of our panelists. Wilf Johnston is the General Manager, APAC region for Enphase Energy. Thanks, Wilf. Alison, Lennon, Research and Teaching Academic, UNSW School of Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering. Thank you very much, Alison. And Sebastien, National Sales Manager for Fronius Australia. Thank you to the 3 of you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have touched on end of life in a little bit of detail. It's been mentioned a number of times throughout our discussion, and we're going to look into that in a lot more detail very shortly. But let's turn our attention rather to risk management in more detail, and in particular when it comes to large-scale assets. We've seen the use cases and the market dynamics for large-scale energy storage and what makes it quite a compelling proposition earlier today. But it is a relatively new technology, and there are a lot of unknowns. The policy landscape is still also very much in flux, so that makes attaining project financing no easy task. Will our next panelists believe that risk management and insurance in particular can play a role here? And we'll discuss this and the role insurance can play in managing project, weather and technology risk, both from an international and a local perspective on our next panel. I can see our panelists appearing now. Jan Napiorkowski, Head of Global Clean Energy from Ariel, and Richard Nunny, Head of Power and Energy Australia at BMS Risk Solutions. Gentlemen, thank you for your patience and thank you for joining our Insight Australia today.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Very well.
How you doing, Jonathan?
Great, nice to see you, Jan. Now, Richard, to you first of all, like BMS brokers are active in Australia across, a number of renewable and battery projects. Going back to the VPP, the VBB rather, fire, how has that kind of impacted how project developers and operators and even insurers are thinking in Australia?
Well, it's a great question, and I just wanted to actually say it's good to have insurance as part of the conversation in one of these Insight events, because often insurance can be left to the last minute, or even when a claim happens, everyone starts to think about insurance. So it's good to have the conversation. And what I might do is I might split the question in 2 and just generally talk about the insurance market, and then I guess focus on the VBB incident and what it means for the insurance market, right? So I guess globally, the renewable sector, and I'm talking wind, solar, and more lately battery, hasn't performed well over the past 5 years. And in Australia, that's been quite a position, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of capacity entering the market during soft market conditions. We've just seen prices come down, coverage very broad, and then as a result of that, we've seen a lot of claims come out. So there's basically more claims coming out than there is premium in the market. So, there's been a period of adjustments going on. The past 24 months, prices have been going up. Insurers have been, I guess, reassessing their underwriting models and all that data. And I guess, what does that mean with the incident at the VBB, right? I mean, I think battery is just one of those, technologies that's still relatively new. Insurers are going to have more scrutiny of what's going on in that battery space. I mean, certainly the risk associated with batteries, especially thermal runaway, which has obviously been spoken about a lot during this conversation, this Insight sort of conversation. Where do we go from here? The insurers are definitely going to focus more on underwriting criteria. We've had a lot of feedback from insurers following the VBB incidents that their models are going to change. Prices will probably continue to keep rising, pushing more potentially retention onto those developers and operators of those assets. And just to put it into perspective for you, and how underwriters, I guess, look at their modeling for these types of projects, they base their rating or their pricing on their loss scenarios or their maximum loss scenarios. And in the case of VBB, you've got one enclosure that is obviously damaged, and obviously fire spread to an adjacent enclosure. So it's all about separation and spacing. And again, it's a conversation that's come up many times during this insights conversation. Australia's blessed with a lot of land, and if we've got a lot of land, let's use it. Let's spread these things out. Let's make sure they don't sort of have fires to adjacent sites and the like. So if there is inadequate separation between enclosures, the insurers' loss estimates are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and their appetite to write these risks is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, which is going to lead to obviously increased pricing. Yeah.
So there's really concrete steps that project developers and EPCs can take. I suppose working with insurers like you to kind of bring down these insurance prices and kind of manage these risks. Is that right?
Well, yeah, essentially, yes. I mean, we are advocates of early engagement. I mean, our role as risk advisor and insurance broker, we want to engage with the parties early in the development phase of these projects, or you've got an operational asset, early in the renewal process, because it's getting all that information together. It's building long-term relationships with insurers so they understand your risk management philosophy, have all the information at hand to do the proper underwriting of the risk. So I can only encourage early engagement. And when insurance is cheap and it's easy, it's often the last thing that everyone thinks about. Oh, I'll go and buy an insurance policy and it's easy. But now with prices going, just to rough numbers, in the past 24 months, predominantly in solar and wind projects, we've seen probably north of 20, 30, 40%, 50% price increases, right? Based on a combination of factors. So yeah, it's all changing, and early engagement is certainly the best way to do it. But there is one other thing that I did want to talk about, and that was one of the factors around the VBB, which I guess the insurers hadn't necessarily taken into consideration, was the wind risk. Obviously, the irony of having a battery storage project co-located with a wind farm, right? So high wind exposures on site, you have a fire, it blows the fire onto the neighbouring or adjacent enclosure. So you've got that separation conversation again, and I think we're going to see more and more of insurers just focusing on that type of risk information.
But the separation though seems like a pretty simple solution. So there are really pretty simple design things that can be done to really minimize that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, separations is one of the factors that goes into the underwriting process. I've heard a lot of on this this over the last few hours around the fire risks. So what are the fire protections on site? The access to local fire brigades and all those sort of things. I mean, there are other underwriting factors that go into it, but yeah, a lot of pre-planning, a lot of early conversation and engagement is the best way forward.
Okay, Jan Napiorkowski, the global head of clean energy for Ariel Ray. Thanks for joining. From a technology perspective, then, there's also performance. It's not just fires. There's performance and reliability of a battery product that comes from a certain vendor. How then does insurance kind of plug into that, or have some solutions at hand for project developers and owners?
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah. So thanks for making that distinction, because at Ariel we specialize in backstopping all kinds of performance warranties for clean energy assets. So we've been doing this for about 12 years, and until now primarily in the solar fuel cell and waste to energy space. And we have been underwriting battery performance guarantees for about 4 or 5 years now. And we have so far been able to insure two large scale projects, and it really comes to our understanding on actually everything what Susan was talking about before. It's really all about understanding what are the performance guarantees, the efficiency, the capacity guarantee which the supplier is offering is this a commercial warranty? We have to offer it because everybody's offering it, and supplier A does it for 10 years, so we're going to do it for 12 years, and then another one's going to do it for 15 years. Or is there a technical understanding, and is there enough technical data within the company or provided by third parties which actually can help us to extrapolate the guaranteed performance levels? I would say that the biggest problem which we have is a combination of the ability to maximize sales revenues by integrators by just essentially engaging into an O&M business. So buying all sort of components, including cells, BMS, etc., and then integrating this and building the system and offering your own warranty without really being engaged in the technical design of the system, not to speak about availability of certain stress tests. And the other aspect is the willingness to relatively quickly, and this is more on the operator side, the willingness to relatively quickly breach warranty conditions in order to maximize profits coming from the arbitrage market, which has been discussed so much today. And that's fine. I mean, if you have systems these days where you know that they can break even within 2-3 years, I guess everybody would do that. But then don't expect that the system will operate as guaranteed for 5 years, not to talk about 10, or these days you even see 15, 20-year warranties out of the blue. So so we are somewhere in between. I think as an insurer, you don't want to be approached if you're essentially only a consideration for either replacement of availability of stress data, or to fill a hole in requirements set by the lender. So back to what Richard said, it's really key for us to be involved in an early stage and to understand what kind of technical design of the system is going to be financed, so we can engage relatively early to make the dialogue transparent between us and the supplier about what data we will want to see to make the insurance conditions, the cheapest and the most structurally attractive to the client.
Yeah, okay. And I'll come back to you in just one moment, Richard. I have one question. It's a bit out of left field, Jan, but I'll see how you can handle it. From your kind of standpoint, your technical standpoint, how effective and safe are fuel cells? Have you engaged with fuel cells at all at Ariel Ray?
Yes, we do. We have worked globally with 2 suppliers, some of the projects. Are you asking me now if you're asking me from a safety and fire point of view, I'd rather comment on the performance, on the performance piece.
Well, we're safe and effective, so let's take the effective part.
Right. I would say we'll find out. All the policies that we offer are really long-term policies, because the goal is to provide a floor on certain output levels, which then enable the operator to service that. So our policies have to match the tenor of the debt, which is typically between 12 to 18 years. So we'll see. You don't expect to have a massive amount of losses in the first 2, 3, 4 years. I would say that the majority of the systems we had insured have operated now for about 4 or 5 years, and have performed okay. But it's really the devil sits in the tail, as we call it in insurance.
Mm-hmm. Sure, the devil's in the detail. Now, Richard, just to kind of wind up our discussion, there's also, Jan's gone into a lot of technology and supplier risk, and we've talked about design with you earlier. What about contractor as well? Because in Australia, everyone in renewables in the large scale space would be very familiar with the story of RCR Tomlinson from WA, old construction company, took on a lot of solar projects and then went bankrupt pretty quickly after kind of overextending itself. Is that also a factor with large-scale battery projects?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think it comes back to that lessons learned from the insurers, right? I mean, RCR was quite a famous example, which, the global insurance market are fully aware of, especially in, the Australian market with what they did. I mean, I guess two answers to it really. I mean, the RCR example was, a lot of projects that have sort of stopped construction midterm because they had to, go off site, and you had to have new contractors come in and finish those projects with, their own design. So that from an insurance point of view, the material change and risk was a concern for insurers. Obviously led to some additional costs from insurance perspective and some delays. So that's always an issue. I mean, I guess the second part of it is, we did some research earlier in the year with an insurance company in the UK, and some of their data suggested or showed that about 50 to 60% of their claims quantum from Australian projects was a result of contractor error. Losses resulting from contractor error. So as a percentage of the overall claims coming in the market, it's quite a large number. So insurers are going to heavily focus on who the contractor is a top tier contractor. They drill down even further into the subcontractors, and there's so many more questions we're getting in that space from the insurers to talk to our clients about. So it's certainly not something that's going to go away. But I think going back to what I said at the start, lessons learned around what happened in that solar wind space over the past 5 years. They'll do a lot more diligence and underwriting on that process moving forward.
Okay. Well, yeah, indeed. Referring back to a theme from an earlier discussion, I think we'll have to wind it up there. Jan Napiorkowski, Global Head of Clean Energy for Ariel Ray, thank you very much. And Richard Nunny, Head of Power and Energy Australia with BMS Risk Solutions. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Okay, well, Bella, I see you've appeared back. I'll hand over for you for our last session of the day. We've mentioned it a couple of times, battery end of life, an important consideration.
It is finally here. We are going to close the loop on batteries. Dr. Christina Pozo-Gonzalo is a senior research fellow at the Deakin University's Institute for Frontier Materials. An expert in electromaterials, Christina has managed numerous research projects in Europe, including in her home country of Spain, before moving to Australia in 2011. Today, she's leading some truly pioneering research and having made a breakthrough in the recycling process of rare earth metals. Christina, welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I hope you can hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Yes. So very happy to be here. Do you want me to share the presentation?
Perfect. That would be great. We're also very happy to have you. Sorry, I wasn't sure whether I should say that or whether you were going to launch right in.
Okay, let me see. You can see all right? Yep.
We're seeing it very well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So as Bella mentioned, I'm Christina Pozo-Gonzalo. I'm from Deakin University in Melbourne. So today I'm going to talk about circular economy, and this is a topic that I feel really passionate about. So I'm very happy about the invitation. So I'm going to be touching three concepts within the circular economy, which will be redesign, repurpose, and recycling. Obviously, because of the interest of time, I'm not going to have much time to explain everything in detail, but I hope you have an idea. So I'm starting with explaining what is circular economy. Sometimes the concept is not that clear. So all of you are familiar with what is linear economy, which is also known as take, make, waste. So basically we take resources, we make a product, and when we don't need a product or it reaches the end of life, we discard it. Therefore, we are generating a large amount of waste that goes into the landfill. There is the second type of economy, which is the recycling economy. It has been with us for a long time. So basically, it's just when a product reaches the end of life, we can make a new product out of that waste. One of the disadvantages of this economy is that it requires quite a lot of energy. And then there is circular economy. And circular economy is about designing products with multiple lifetimes. So basically, what we can have, we see here in these circles, we see that these are all lifetimes, and basically just is designing from the beginning. So circular economy is based on three different principles. The first one is about designing out waste and pollution. So that means that from the beginning, we think about the whole supply. What's happening when we design a product, what's going to happen when we reach the end of time, and try to think about minimizing as much as possible the pollution that we are generating. It's about keeping producing materials in use. There is different ways of reaching this goal, and I will explain a little bit later. And within the circular economy, it's also about regenerating natural systems. Obviously, for all of this, we need everybody's involvement. So I always say that it started with one as an individual, but we need to think from the researcher's perspective. We need to think from the consumers. Obviously, government is a big play a key role in here, changing policies, and also businesses thinking about the produce that they are manufacturing, how we can change that. But obviously today is about energy storage, and I'm going to talk a little bit about lithium-ion batteries. I didn't want to limit it only to lithium-ion batteries, but obviously this is a technology that is dominating most of the applications from electronic vehicles and electric vehicles. If we're thinking about how the percentage of these devices is per year, so normally is around 25% increase per year, and also 60% of those, they are corresponding to electrical vehicles. So obviously the lifetime of these batteries, it depends on the applications, obviously, but I just wanted to give you here probably just start talking about numbers. So in 2020, it was 1 million electrical vehicles that they were sold in the US and 6 million globally. So we need to think about all the batteries that we are required for all of these electrical vehicles. If we're thinking about spent lithium-ion batteries, so it was predicted that last year it should be about around 500,000 tons of spent lithium batteries. And in Australia by 2036, so this is Australia where I'm located, there will be 137,000 metric tons. Okay, we are talking about big numbers in here. So how the circular economy can help, or how can be included in Kurobi energy storage. So this is a similar type of diagram. So we have the linear economy here. So basically we extract the materials, we manufacture a battery, it has a certain use, reach the end of life, and is discarded. And here I write the landfill, but there is other possibilities. So basically, to include the circular economy here, basically we need to tackle at different points of this linear economy, like repurposing. So there has been some talks today about repurposing a battery. So it's basically about getting some fraction of this battery, of a part of this battery, in another second use. As we can see, we are already giving a new lifetime to this battery, and that can be increased. But obviously, there will be a moment with this battery, it cannot be used anymore, and it's going to reach the end of life. And basically, we will be recovering the materials for the battery. I think we are all aware that a lot of these materials, they are costly, they are scarce, and it's also toxic. So it's better to recycle and recover it in the landfill. The materials that we're recovering here from the recycling, yes, they can go again into battery, but they can go also to other applications. And I think that's an important point because we'll be opening different type of business and opportunities as well. But something that is very important as well in here, and we are, these are basically the three areas that we work at Deakin University, is the redesign. How we can redesign batteries towards repurposing and recycling, but also, like to increase the lifetime. And that's the 3 points I'm going to be covering today. So when I talk about redesign, I know the title here is Redesign for Sustainable Energy Storage. That's something that is always in my mind about more sustainable energy storage. How we can do that for sustainable energy storage, but also for the circular economy. So there is 2 key points. One is about the materials and about the chemistry, and another is about the cell design, the casing. If we talk about the chemistry, I'm just going to talk comment on a couple of points, mostly because of the time. But chemistry is one of the points that we need to consider. So I know that we have been talking quite a lot about lithium-ion battery. We touch on other technologies, but there is also other technologies that have higher energy density than lithium, as is the case of metal sulfur, metal air. Obviously, these technologies, they still need research, but that's something that we could be focusing on. Because they have high energy density, what it means is that's going to be in use for longer time, and therefore we won't be required raw materials as much as in the case of, for example, lithium-ion batteries. We need to think about the environmental impact of extracting constantly materials from mining. The other thing I want to talk about is electrolytes. So again, Dr. Megha Kar before, she also mentioned about electrolytes. And it's true that the electrolytes that they are commonly used in lithium-ion batteries or most of the energy storage systems, they are volatile and flammable. So we need to think on and consider electrolytes that they are non-volatile and flammable, because this is very important from the perspective of ignition and fires that they can be in the batteries during operation. But let's not forget as well during transportation, and during storage. And those are very key points when we are considering, when we are talking about repurposing and recycling. The batteries has to be stored somewhere. They need to be transported. So it's important that. And then the other point I want to talk from this slide is about cell design. So what we need to think about in that regard is how we can facilitate the disassembly of the battery toward repurposing and recycling. And it will be also great to start to have a standardization about the batteries, mostly because that can be done, the disassembly of the battery could be done in an automatic mode. So I just wanted to show in here the different examples of battery pack designs that there is in electrical vehicles. So these are 3 different models we can see here. And we can see how the dimensions, the sizes, they are all very different depending on the manufacturer. And obviously the chemistries are also different. But talking mostly about the designs, the standardization around this, it will really improve and it will really help into the circular economy. In terms of repurpose, there has also been some great comments today. And basically what we mean in here is that, for example, batteries that they use in electrical vehicles, it can be then in a second life for stationary storage. So this is an example of a battery pack. So it's composed of different modules, and the modules, they are composed on different cells. So part of these modules or part of these cells, it can be used into a second life. I include a few barriers in here, but the first 2 I already comment about the collection and about the different chemistries and design. What I want to mention is that obviously to detect and to test every one of these modules and cells add to the price of the battery, of the final battery, but it's also that it's required to do. And also one of the issues obviously is how we can guarantee a lifetime of these repurposed batteries in terms of safety and also in terms of performance. Finally, just touching a little bit on battery recycling. So this will be the 3rd pillar of the circular economy in energy storage. I just mentioned that the most commonly methods that they are used from the industrial approach, they are hydrometallurgy and pyrometallurgy. There is other methods that they are also in development in some degrees, like for example, direct recycling and bioleaching. Some of the major problems that there is at the moment with the battery recycling, obviously that there is a large number of steps involved in the recycling process. Then they requires normally a combination of several methodologies. As just an example, I extracted this diagram from a paper. These are industry partners that they do recycling of batteries. So we can see the large number of different steps that they are required. This is even, there is more problems, obviously, or more issues about the battery recycling because the chemistries are different and they are also ever evolving. So it's quite difficult to have a process that it can be used for every single battery at the same time. Some of the processes that they are utilizing is issues like around temperatures because they can operate around 1,000 degrees. So that means that we are generating a large amount of pollutants that go into the atmosphere. And obviously, there's a large number of secondary waste streams that we had to deal with them at some point. And I think I'm going to leave it in here only mostly because of the time, but happy to take any questions.
Wonderful.
Stop sharing now.
Wonderful. We do actually have some questions. One which really nicely relates to one of our speakers before. What safeguards are required to address the safety concerns raised by Professor Christensen for the sale of second-hand EV batteries for second life use?
I don't know for sure. Okay, I have to start with that, but there's something that it needs to be addressed because obviously all of the batteries, they need to be tested. There have to be models around what is going to be the lifetime. Mm-hmm. So this is a problem that needs to be overcome. So. But yeah.
Excellent. And do batteries with active cooling, like the Tesla Power Pack, have higher risks with storage and transport as those components that are not in operation in these situations?
During operation, there is higher risk, definitely, because the battery is going to be heated up. But during storage, and also because if we are talking about, depends on the battery, but we are talking about batteries from electrical vehicles, those ones are large in Spain. It's something in volume, sorry. If something happens with the battery, the risks are higher. There was some images also before from the Tesla fire that happened. So obviously always related to size. So.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's really interesting. Well, thank you so much, Christina. It was really great to have you here. Christina Pozo-Gonzalo, Senior Research Fellow at Deakin University's Institute for Frontier Materials. Jonathan, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Bella. End of life, an important consideration for sure. Well, thanks to all of our speakers, panelists, and presenters today. We have come to the final stages of our Insight Australia event. And thank you very much for your interest and for your attendance throughout the day. My apologies. We are running slightly, or a little more than slightly, late. Almost 800 people signed up to this event, and they will be receiving a link, as will you, to a recording of this event. And most of the slides that you've seen today, most of the presentations will also be available for download. So you can pass that on to friends and colleagues who are unable to attend live. There's also a link to a survey about this event in the chat function on this app here. And I please do ask you to fill that out, because that really helps us to optimize our events and make better events for you in the future. If you'd like to get in contact with other attendees, the networking function will remain open for a little bit after the event, and Blake Matic is standing by once again, ready to welcome you at one of the coffee tables. And of course, thanks very much, most sincerely, to our event partners, without whom we couldn't host these events. So Ariel, Enphase, Fronius, Scholes, and Stoibli, thank you very much for partnering with us on Insight Australia again in 2021. Just as a little thank you to you, there's a promo code available to a subscription to PV Magazine Global. Of course, as the editor of that, I encourage you to take up that opportunity. And we've got an upcoming event, Roundtables USA, which is actually just in a few weeks' time. So you can see a short video about that event, a quick teaser, and see if you'd like to become involved. Well, we've come to the end. Thank you very much, Bella Peacock. It was great to have you as my co-moderator, my co-MC today. Thanks to Blake Matic for your help with the program and also your investigation into the VBB. Thanks to PV Magazine's events teams, Lucie Demelier and Frédéric Egera in particular, and Marina Raman and Adelaide Cadu from PV Magazine Marketing. Keep well and safe, and stay in touch with PV Magazine for news, views, and more ways to keep up and keep pace with the global solar and energy storage industries. Until then, I'm Jonathan Gifford, and it's a wrap for Insight Australia 2021.
Regarding the presentation and slide deck.
Coming up now is our first panel.
You've seen from the module makers from a production standpoint.
I'm not sure that if we had manufacturing in Europe, we would not have seen the same price increases in the last 3 months.
Thank you for the invitation, and hello everyone.
There's a risk of doing nothing. There's a risk of doing something also potentially.
So let's get that perspective now.
And you can expect that we will be a much more proactive player.
To be able to decarbonize, there's actually quite a lot of different steps you can take. But the first one is always related to monitoring your emissions.
Technology is there, but the project really now needs to happen.
The answer is clear. We need to install more and more renewables.
Get involved in the discussion.